Oh my God, we have Jonas here.
Yes, I
Wow,
know. I saw him coming in.
that's amazing. Well, everybody, this is lesson five of Zero to Hero. I call it the Dataverse quest. Today we have the honor and privilege to have Sara Lagerquist. I hope that was close to what it
Close
sounds
enough.
like. Sarah, I think I have to make confessions. I do confess. I did confessions with Rebecca the other day when I started to follow her, and I gotta do a quick one for you. I think I saw a post from you back in 2017, and you were talking about child workflows in a way that I never thought of. And so that's when I started following you, and it was just brilliant because as developers or as developers, pro developers, you always look for the most complex way to accomplish something. And maybe just to say amen to that. But you know what you showed was so brilliant, and it kind of shifted my mindset when it comes to low code and no code. Always to look for not necessarily the easy way out, but a way to use the tool as it was designed to be used, and then we refer to code afterwards. So you are, in my opinion, a true hero in the community as a professional and in life as well. The things you overcame career wise and personally, man, it's just amazing. Thank you so much for being here, for really uh, blessing us with the knowledge that you're about to share and just who you are. I want to acknowledge some other folks who are here, the faithful ones. Andre, Norm, Rebecca is here. Jonas Rap is here. Come on, give it up to, to Jonas. And then Pranav and all the rest of the crew is here. Amazing day. Sarah, take it away. I already stole 3 minutes of your time.
It's fine. Thank you so much. You're setting the bar quite high when you're boosting me up like that. So let's start to share my slides and we'll talk through what we're going to talk about today. Let's share. There we go. Gonna try to see you at the same time. Okay, cool. So today's lessons are, let's see if I can turn, about business logic. But first, who the hell am I talking about business logic? My name is
Oh,
at CRMK in Stockholm. I come from a user background. I started out as a user. I have no IT education or anything like that. I was an administrator, fell in love with CRM 2011, way back, and just started to fiddling around a little bit thanks to Jonas here, and then turned into a consultant afterwards. So my focus is mainly coming from a former user perspective when I design the business and application, of course. I am no code focused. Since I don't have an IT education, I haven't learned how to code. So no code, low code is my focus area. I do design solutions that requires code, so I know how to design with code, but I don't write the code myself. I'm a Microsoft BizApp MVP since a couple of years back. And since last year, I'm cancer fucking free too. My last treatment was in 30th of December 2021. So just a couple of months ago. Definitely worth celebrating, yes. So if you want to contact me about this session or for any other reason, you find me on Twitter, you find me my blog, you find me on LinkedIn, and I do also have the old style email if that's your preferred approach of contact. Okay, enough about me. this is the agenda. So I've been given 2 Thursdays to talk about business logic, which is a huge, huge topic. So to try to do some type of divide it between these 2 dates, I'm going to focus on the zeros today. We're going to talk about what different business logic options do we have and how do they work. It's going to be quite basic, just to take you through some of the options we have. Next Thursday is going to be a lot more higher level discussions around design principles, when to use it, to different options and why. Put that in categories and examples for you to really help you and guide you through making those decisions on what business logic that suits your particular need. Okay, so what the is business logic then? I Googled it, I looked it up on Wikipedia. It says, in computer software, business logic or domain logic is the part of the program that encodes the real-world business rules that determine how data can be created, accessed, and changed. So I want to focus a bit on the last part. So we're talking about determine how data can be created, accessed, and changed. So thinking about Dataverse, everything you know about Dataverse so far, that pretty much includes everything that you do that is business logic. That is why this topic is so enormously huge, because there's so many parts of the Dataverse sphere that we can call business logic. So I made a list. I did simplify it a bit, obviously, because it's huge, but it's still quite complete to our different tools and features that we can use to create logic. And here is the list. So I, in this slide, divided into no and low code and code. But there's so many ways to divide it and categorize it. And that's what we're going to do in the next sessions on comparing these different ones to each other. But so today we're just going to talk about what these are. But as you see, my list is quite extensive, and we will not have time in the 50 minutes I have left to talk about all of these, unfortunately. So I will focus on these ones. And to make it even more understandable, I've decided to put them into context. So I'm going to talk a bit about them, and then I'm going to build in a demo so you can use it. Because I'm the kind of person who learns best connecting scenarios with theory. So I assumed that many of you might be the same. So I'm going to take the theory and talk about that, and then we're going to implement a few examples for you to learn more about. But that means we have like an optional homework for next time. Since we're going to compare all of these next times, it would be good for your sake to know what these things are. I'm going to do like a one-liner on each of these next time, so you're going to get like a hint, and then we're going to categorize them. So of course you're going to learn more about them, but you do benefit mostly of the next session if you actually do some optional homework and read up on these different logic tools. Okay, enough of the intro slides. Here we go. So the first things we're going to talk about are, before I start building, are 3 different type of complex fields. So field types. The first one, Rollup Fields is a type of business logic you can use in Dataverse, and its functionality is to aggregate child records. It's a read-only functionality. You can do a min and max, and you can summarize, and you can average, and you can do a count of those child records. That is your option. You can also apply filters on the aggregation in case you don't want to have, for a typical filter would be to only aggregate active child records, for example, if you're going to do a summarize or count or whatever. Another really good thing to know about rollup fields are they are not limited by the access to the rows that the user have. So if I have security roles that limit my access to certain rows, when I look at a rollup field that summarizes the amount of an order or amount or number of contacts or whatever it summarizes, aggregates, this rollup will not take into consideration what security I have. So when you're using rollups, you have to be aware to not use it on sensitive data if you're putting it in apps and forms where other people can see it. It comes with some limitations. It updates once an hour. The first time you create it, I think it runs 12 hours after the first time. So it will update probably during nighttime or not business hours. Then the most, how do you say, the most often time they can update it is once an hour. You can also update it on demand. So either once an hour is scheduled, or you can, as a user, do an update on demand. When you do an update on demand, it's a maximum of 50,000 rows that it can aggregate at one time. If it's on the scheduled one, though, it can aggregate more, which is kind of funny, but that's how it is. You should be aware that there's a maximum of 100 rollups per organization and a maximum of 10 rollups per table. You cannot aggregate many-to-many relationships. So this slide is a summary of the things that I find most important about rollup fields. I've added a link at the bottom because if you want to access my slides afterwards, you're totally allowed to. And there's a lot more functionality and limitations that you might have to be aware of. I've just tried to simplify it and take the most important things, but here's a link to the bigger picture. Okay, next, calculated fields. So calculated fields does a calculation of some sort on the current table and or something on a parent table. Okay, so rollup fields on children, calculated on current or parent. So different directions. Also read only, exactly like rollups. Interesting with calculated fields, I think most people associate this to being numbers or maybe currency fields, but you can calculate text fields and choice fields and yes and no fields. For example, if you have maybe you have different yes and no fields or different options on both parent and current table, and depending on conditions on those, you want to turn this calculated field into either yes or no, like a summarization of that, a calculation of that. That could be very interesting. So that's a use case which are not used enough, in my opinion, because people think, oh, calculation is 1 + 1 or this times that, and not the other field types that they actually support. There's limitations, of course. You can't trigger workflow plugins or duplicate rules or other logic on calculated fields. There's a maximum of 5 chained calculation. And I said it can handle parent table, but that's not completely true because it can't handle polymorphic parents, which I've misspelled in this slide. That means fields that are lookups to several tables at once. For example, the customer field lookup. That is both to contact and account. And we can't use calculated fields and reach the tables, the parent, when it's a polymorphic, unfortunately. It can't span over 3 tables, even if you use chains, which is good to know. And you can't use calculated fields in rollups if they are chains either. And which you will be very aware of when we start building stuff, this triggers on save. It's sync, but it triggers on save, not instantly. Okay, last one, auto numbering. This creates unique numbering for a table. It's a text field in the background, which means you can activate it on already created text columns. A very useful text field to actually activate auto number on is the name field that is created out of the box when you create a new table, which is where I mostly use it and turn that into, which is also what we're going to do in the demo. You can choose if you want to string or date or don't have a prefix at all, but there's different options for prefixes. There's also limitations, of course. You are able to set seeding on your auto numbering, which means you set like a start auto number. This is not solution aware. So if you deploy, you have to set a new or same seeding in your target environment. This is frustrating, I can tell you, but it's the limitation we live with. I have a few tips regarding these complex fields. This is what I evaluate first if they can solve my requirements, my problems, the business logic I want to achieve, because they are quick and easy to configure and therefore very low in complexity and doesn't affect much other logic in the system. So this is where I go first to check. But I always go back to the docs, the documentation on Microsoft to check the exact limitations, because there is a lot of limitations to be aware of, because they are so quick and easy. They also come with a lot of built-in limitations. So every time I have a new scenario, I have to go back to the docs, just check, so will this suit me, or will I trip on one of these limitations? Okay, enough, let's build. Whew. So I have done some minor prepping. I've created one model-driven app, 2 custom tables, and a couple of columns on those, just so we have the basic to talk around and create around. And I've chosen a case that I think most people can relate to. So what I've done is that I have an event table, and related to that, which is child records, are event orders. Okay, so if we're going to use Rollup Fields, wouldn't it be neat if let's go into our event here, we do a rollup of the event orders that are not canceled. We want to see all active event orders on this account of those. So that's what we're going to start with creating. Okay. I'm in make.powerask.com, of course. I'm in my solution. That's where I always start. And I navigate to my parent table, because that's where I want to do the aggregation. I add a columns. I say number of sold tickets, something like that. It's probably a whole number. I don't think anyone can do a half seat. And this is where I have the option to define this as a calculated or a rollup field. I have to do this when it's created. I can't do this afterwards. So it's only when I create, I can choose calculated or rollup. So in this field, choose rollup. And then apparently wait a bit. And then wait some more. There we go. What happens is I get this pop-up with the semi-old tech, which I can define that filtering that I was talking about. So the first thing is I want to add the related child entity, because in reality, I can have several relationships to event so it have several childs, of course, child tables. But in this case, I only have event order, so it's kind of easy to pick what related entity I want to aggregate. Here's the filters. It's optional, but in this case, I do want to filter on that status reason that we saw briefly. So I want to only count those who are either reserved or paid. So this is my filters, my conditions, and what kind of aggregation am I interested in? Do I want to summarize that? No, I want to count the event orders. So these are my options, and I decided to count. And just for the fun of it, let's also add a roll-up to see when the last event order was done. So I'm going to do a roll-up of a date field now. Last event order could be interesting to see. And that was way quicker. I'm going to add the same related entity, of course. Filters, no, not necessarily, because I don't care what status or anything they have. And then I'm going to pick the max based on created on. That makes sense. When was the last order created? Save and close. Let's just put them out on the form so you can see what that looks like. That and last event order. Save, publish. So these will obviously not contain data since I just created them. But like I said, I can decide to trigger Rollup Fields on demand too. If my form published will go through. There we go. And what I do then is that I press this little calculation button and choose to recalculate. And then I get the last date when something was created and number of sold tickets that are of the status I want. Okay, we're going to create an auto number for the name of the event order, which is the custom table. You see it's missing the name, and that's really bad design and bad build principle. So you should always put a name because that's a searchable column. It's what's viewed in lookups and everything. So you need a proper name. And for this, we're going to use auto number. So let's navigate to the event order table and go to the column called name. See, this is a text field, and here I have the option to change into a auto number. So what I have here is that I can pick if it's going to be string or date prefix number, or custom if I don't want any of there. So I can say that I want all my events to start with Sara, and then I want many digits. And here is the seed value that I was talking about that are not solution anywhere. So if I put 1,000 as a start, I will have to, or if I change this to something else, like 5,000, I will have to go into my target environment and update the seed value for that too. Boom. Okay, now we used 2 of the complex field that I presented previously. Now we're gonna do a calculated field. So on my event, I have number of available tickets that I plan to sell, and I have a cost. So it would be reasonable to have a calculation on the event calculating estimated revenue. So I want to take tickets time the cost for it. So let's add a column again. Revenue, I think the appropriate English is. Let's pick currency, which is money, and then add calculation. You will see that the editor for the calculation is quite similar to the Rollup Fields. They were released at the same time in, I think, 2013. So I can add a condition, which is if this contains data, or I don't have to do a condition, but let's pick that it would be good if cost is greater than 0. That makes sense. And whoops. If that is true, then here is where I define what fields I wanted to do in my calculation. If it's a parent, I can just write that parent and then dot the field, the lookup field first. But in this scenario, it's on the current table that we have. So I think I name it. Is it not? Let me see what I'm doing here. Huh. I'm just going to close that and open it again. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong or what's going on. If I want to edit something, I can always go back. So let's say the current entity cost. I'm on the wrong entity. That makes a lot more sense if I do that on the right table. Sorry. Okay, start again. Since I don't hear or see you, I'm going to pretend you did not notice that. And then let's pick currency again, add calculation. This should make a lot more sense. Okay, again, check if cost is greater than 0. That's quite basic logic. And if so, take tickets times cost. Cool. Let's put that out on the forum too quickly and see the result of that. There we go. So note that they are both, the roll-ups and the calculated fields are both read-only fields, like I said in my slides. And that, again, the calculation, like I said, was sync. So in this case, I did not have to trigger the update. It was updated just by me looking at it and having this data saved. And the condition that I said, which is the cost should be greater than 0, that is updated. Okay, let's go back to slides. Let's talk about the next piece of business logic, business rules. So business rules are very wide on the possibilities and functionalities they have. They have one great limitation, and that's they can only handle rules created in the context of the same table that we are on. I cannot use conditions on data from related tables. And that's usually what you want to do, I can tell you in real case scenarios. So that's a frustrating piece, but if you find yourself having to create rules in the context of one table, business rules are magical. They can do lots of stuff. They are condition-based functionality. You can define the visibility of things, show or hide based on those conditions. You can do different types of validation. For example, if you have condition that says, if this, then make these fields required or mandatory, or do not make them mandatory because data has changed, etc., etc. You can also put up error messages. So the user sees that, oh, okay, I'm not allowed to do this, or I have to put in this, or I have to do that to give them notification of what they're doing wrong. They can also automate things. They can put in recommendation like, based on this and this data, we think that you want to populate this with this. Don't you want to do that? Yes and no. You can also set and clear columns, both default values and other values that are not default. Also perform basic calculations. They're not super advanced, but you can do like plus minus times that. Okay, so my tips for business rules. They are very diverse, but since they have limitation, it's easy to think that, okay, maybe I solved this small problem with the business rule, then I add a JavaScript to do the rest of the logic that I want to do, and maybe a real-time workflow that does something else. And I would say, don't mix. Use it for simple business logic. Do not have other business logic that's with the same trigger. Really contemplate if you have to have business rules and other logic. You also have to capture all conditions. I'm going to explain more when we go into demo. But business rules are wonderfully stupid. So you always have to put an else to your ifs. If not, your data and your rules is going to be very messy. But it's the only no-code instant logic that does not require you to save before it triggers, which is what you really should use this for, if that's your use case. There are other alternatives that are low code, which is the relatively new pages. But besides from that, like even other sync business logic, like calculated fields, are triggered on save and are not instant. Real-time workflows then. So background, the workflow engine is really old tech. And when I go into demo, you're gonna notice that it's really old tech because the interface is really old. You can tell. And the asynchronous, the not real-time, the background workflows, Microsoft recommends you don't use the workflow engine for, that you go and create Power Automate flows for that instead. But they haven't replaced the real-time functionality with other tech. So for now, this is what we have if we want to do real-time workflows. So what are real-time workflows? They can trigger on create, delete, and update, and not conditions. So they are sync, which is the biggest benefit here. They can do conditions based on related entities, and that's why they differ from the business rules. If I'm doing logic that I can do on one table, I would always go with business rules. But since my use case is usually that I have to do it over several relationships, parents and etc., their parents maybe, then I have to result to go into real-time workflows. Our limitations did this too, of course. It affects performance, and it's actually quite noticeable since this is also on save. So when you save, this triggers, and you can tell that that row you're on is kind of like, ooh, because you're using a real-time workflow. So you should only do real-time workflow when you really, really need it. I will also show you in my demo that the dialogue that they put up for the user, that there's something wrong with the validation, for example, it's quite ugly. It says business process error. Oh. And the trigger doesn't filter on conditions. So if you put the trigger to be on create, it will always trigger whenever something is created, no matter if your first condition is if this only if this data, this field contains data, for example, which is different to Power Automate, which can actually trigger on conditions and create and update and delete, for example. So I use real-time workflows for two things, and two things only, actually. And that is validations on related tables. Like I said, if I want to do something on current table, I would use a business rule. But since I have validation that I need to display error message to the user that okay, based on data on related tables, you can't go forward with doing what you're trying to do. That is when I use real-time workflows. I also use it for naming. Like I said, it's really important that you name your custom tables correctly, the records, the rows you create. And for searchability and for lookup and for everything like that, you might want to have naming that is a concatenation of different fields, different columns on that table. If that is the case, then I would use real-time workflows for that. If I can get away with auto number or maybe even a business rule to do the naming when it's only one other field, then I would do that. But these are the two only times I use this. Okay, let's build again. Whew. So first thing we're going to do is that we're going to add a business rule that calculates the estimate revenue on the event. And you're like, but Sara, we already did that with the calculated fields. Yes, but I want to show you the difference between tech that sounds like they do the same thing, but they're actually quite different. So I'm going to create that and display the difference to you. Okay, so what I do is I have my table. There's a tab called business rules. We're going to add business rule and pretend we did not see that error message on top of the screen, and I hope that does not affect the demo. So like I said, business rules are condition-based. So let's, for demo's sake, put in the same condition that I did for my calculated field. So I'm not going to follow my own best practice and put in an else. I'm just going to put in an if. So I'm going to say, okay, if the cost is greater than 0, then I press apply. So I have the options to add more rules, more conditions, which I then can define should be either or in the same. Then that is for this condition. It's drag and drop. This is if it's true, downwards is if it's fake. Also, best practice is, of course, to always use proper display names. So when someone goes in and read what this business rule does, it's quite easy to read, and not only in the text view, but in the visualization too. So components, this is what we have to do. Like I said, you can do set visibility if something should show or hide, if something is business required, the error message. You can lock and unlock fields, default value, set field value, and recommendation, which we're going to do in the second business rule we use. So for now, we're going to set calculations. So we're going to set field value, but first we need somewhere to put it. So let's go and create. So if we compare it to the calculated fields, we created it like one piece of logic. This is 2 pieces of logic because I need to create the currency field and then the business logic, the business rule on top of that. So let's say it's estimated revenue business rule currency done. There's a risk that it won't display here now. Nope. So let's start over. Add a business rule. again, our condition should be that cost is greater than 0. Apply. Set field value. Then we want to set the estimated revenue field to a formula where we say the cost times another field, which is tickets, and then apply. With business rules, you also have to activate them. So before we can test this out, we need to activate. I also want to add that when you're creating business rules, you have the opportunity to set different scope. Scope defines if it's server side or client side. I think all logic should be server side if you don't have a really good reason to do it client side. So I only use scope entity. With that said, I'm probably going to be faced with exceptions for that too. But try, and we're going to talk more about client side and server side the next time and why you would pick either or. But for now, we're going to keep the scope to entity and activate this rule. It's activating, and in the meantime, we have to go back to the form and put out that second estimated revenue column that we added. So let's put that one below the calculated field. And update. Okay, so if my scenario would be more like me creating event drafts and I want to dabble with, so I know what my estimated revenue needs to be, and I'm gonna be like, okay, so if I have 400 seats, how much can I charge for tickets? Because I can't do math by myself, so I need the system to do it for me. So if I change data here to like, okay, let's do 1,200 kroner for each, notice that the Rollup fields, the calculated field is the same as before because it runs on save, while we have the instant logic with the business rule. This is, and if I want to copy, you see that this is not read only, so I can edit this, which I probably don't want to do. But do you also remember that I didn't put in an else statement? So I did not say what I wanted the business rule to do if the cost was 0 or less. So if I put in 0 now, we're going to have the same estimated revenue because I haven't said that it should clear it, or I should do that times that even when it's 0. So this is what I mean by business rules being stupid. You really have to declare the else. And for someone who codes, maybe that is the most obvious thing for you ever. For someone who comes from a pure business background, I would not say that's so obvious. Yeah, okay, let's add the different type of business rule. I was talking about recommendation, and I feel that this is not used enough. I don't use it enough even. I think this is a nice functionality, but it requires a bit from the users to define on when things should be recommended. So I have an example scenario that when I create a new event, it's going to have status reason, draft as default. Okay, which makes sense. I'm not done with the event information. It's going to be in draft. So I want a business rule that says that when there's a start date, when there is a ticket and cost information, suggest that the status region should change to active, so I don't forget to put it out of draft. That's a reasonable scenario. So let's add that business rule. So again, I'm going to do conditions with not my best practice recommendations. I'm going to put in just the if statement and not the else. So I'm going to put in if cost contains data, and add a rule if start contains data, and then add a third one that says, yes, I also want ticket to contain data. Apply. If I'm insecure on what did I actually put in here, because I have to scroll up and down, I can also look at the text view here and see, okay, cost contains data and start contains data and ticket contains data. That's my condition. Then drag and drop the recommendation. So what is the field I want to do recommendation on? It's the status reason. And I'm going to question, ready to click here if you want to activate your event. Apply. We're not done yet. We still have to put an action. We still have to put in the definition that is actually gonna activate it when they click yes to the recommendation. So again, we have to pick status reason and pick the value of active. Apply, save, and activate. Okay, cool. So let's go to see if I'm not even sure if I had to reload it. Okay, so let's name this test demo. We put in a start date. We put in tickets. We put in a cost. And it did not work yet. Because that's what I said, right? It's activated. Okay, let's try again. Put in a start date, put in some tickets, put in a cost. See that there's a little light bulb showing up here next to the status reason. When I click that, I get the recommendation. Are you ready to publish? Click here if you want to activate your event. And when I apply, it's activated and I can save. The bad side is that you can still see the little light bulb, even though I've done the recommendation. But you can use this for several scenarios. I just think that people are not really aware that this is a possibility that exists. Okay, now we also want to do a real-time workflow that limits the user to create event orders if the event is in draft. Because I don't want people to do event orders on something that's not done yet or something that is canceled. And since that regarding is logic that I want to implement on the event orders, but I want to use data that's on the parent, which is the event status, I will have to use real-time workflow instead of a business rule. So let's go back into my app, create, sorry, create a new automation process workflow. Not active event warning. And it's going to run on the event order. I have to uncheck that it's a background one, which is default, because I want to do the real-time one. And I'm going to create. And this is where you see that it's really old tech. So what I have to define here too is the scope of it. And in this case, I want to trigger on create, just like my slide. I can do on change, on a specific field update, but without condition, or if it's deleted. So first, I'm going to add a step. And this is also really slow. And that's where you also can tell that it's really old tech. Where I do a check condition. And I'm going to check if the parent, the related entity parent, has a status reason that is not equal to active. So if it's not active, I want to throw the user an error message that it was not successful. And then I can define what it's going to say in this little one. Event is not active. Is not. Save and close. Like business rules, I have to activate this before they start applying. This is also on save logic, like I said, which means that this would not be really a good solution if I have a lot of fields when I create a new event order that I need to populate. So say I'm typing and typing and typing, and then it does not affect until I hit closed. So now we know that this event is in draft. So let's just try it and save event order. And it says event is not active. This is what I mean about the ugly dialogue. I don't think this is pretty to the user. It does its job without code. It's easy to configure. It's easy to maintain, but it's not very, very pretty. So I have a couple of more slides. I know I'm almost out of time actually, but so if you have to go, totally understand, but I'm going to continue anyway with the last couple of slides. So Power Automating one slide, biggest joke ever. I've done whole sessions on just the Power Automate Dataverse connector, which means that if I'm going to talk about Power Automate in relation to Dataverse, it's too big. You don't have time for that. And like I said, we're 1 minute away from full time. So I'm just going to explain really simply that, okay, so Power Automate is highly flexible. Compared to the other logic I've presented today, it's quite straightforward and has its limitations. Power Automate is highly flexible, which means there are more of a shouldn't things that are limitations that you can't achieve them. Which means that if you're choosing to implement logic with Power Automate in Dataverse, you really need to know what you're doing, because there's a lot of limitations that you might not be like pushed in your face and you're like, oh, I can't do that. I shouldn't do that. You need to know them without the Power Automate telling you that you need to know them. But they are the replacement of async workflows and custom workflow activities nonetheless. So this is logic that you have to learn. And what is the most common scenario that you use Power Automate for in Dataverse that you used to use custom workflow activities and async workflows for? It's updating child records and doing loops on data on child records, which was not easy to do and was not possible to do completely without code before Power Automate. So that's all I'm going to say about Power Automate because we don't have time to build. So instead, I want to remind you that the agenda for next time, this was kind of basic. This was to put in some of the basic logic into context and to display some of the problematics you can run into when choosing the proper solution. And the whole next session will be about categorizing these, putting them into tables, putting them into scenarios about when to choose what. If you want to contact me about anything I've said so far, this is, again, reach out on social media on any of these channels. If you want my super simple event solution to try to replicate what I did today, just hit me up and I'll send the unmanaged solution for you to import in a trial environment or whatever you have if you want to play around. And if not, I hope I see you next Thursday. Thank you so much for spending your 1 hour with me.
Now this is loaded. Yeah, for sure. You wouldn't be able to pack. I don't think anybody would be able to pack so much content in 1 hour. And you have graciously delivered. So that's really cool. I want to just make note of something. We have a playlist on the Zero to Hero channel for Power Automate. The first 3 videos will go through what Sara is talking about. The first one is an opening of what it is, Power Automate. And then the second and third will talk about connectors. The third video is a deep dive on Dataverse connectors. So you see how to create a record, how to delete a record, how to loop through records. So it will talk about the syntax used there. So if you want to get more knowledge on these things, the videos are available on this playlist, and then there are other things here also if you want to watch the videos later on. But that's I think it's a good resource. But I'm I suspect to talk about my own stuff, but if you go for it. Sara, thank you so much for presenting here, for sharing your knowledge. I'm looking forward to next week. This is so exciting. It's good stuff that you're presenting here. I really love the fact that you really focus on the tool as is, not as much as, oh, we can do it and just don't do it. No, you talk about the potential within Dataverse, and this is really exciting. I want to thank everybody who was here today and the folks that will watch it on YouTube online later on. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. Yeah. All right. Take care. Bye-bye. Good night there, Sara and Rebecca, or anybody who is in that side of the globe. That's already night. Good evening.
Thank you. Great session, Sara. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Victor.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good
It was a
evening.
great session.
Session for us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.